It is called Lothric. Where the transitory lands of the Lords of Cinder converge. The pilgrims discover the truth of the old words. The fire fades, and the lords go without thrones. When the link of fire is threatened, the bell tolls, unearthing the old lords of Cinder from their graves. Aldrich, Saint of the Deep. Farron's Undead Legion, the Abyss Watchers. And the reclusive lord of the profaned capital, Yon the Giant. Only in truth, the lords will abandon their thrones, and the unkindled will rise. Nameless, accursed undead, unfit even to be cinder. And so it is that ash seeketh embers.
I want to start this video a little differently. I just want to say, make some time for your friends. Let them know that they're appreciated. And remember that people care about you. There's a pretty common sentiment among Souls players that Dark Souls saved my life. And while I wouldn't go so far as to say it saved me, it definitely gave me something to work toward. Originally, I wasn't even a fan of Dark Souls 3. I struggled through it using a mod that reduced incoming damage by like 90%. And I finally saw the appeal after beating the game, deleted my install to get rid of the mod, and played through properly, and it became my favourite game. Because of how obfuscated the lore of Souls games is, you can kind of approach the game however you want. You can make up a backstory for your character, allegiances they may have had before, or you can just play through as a blank slate, ready to be chiselled out by the absolute poundings that await you. As this is my favourite game, I don't want to ruin the first time experience of anyone that thinks they may want to play it. So if that's you, I implore you now, go buy the game, play it, enjoy it. Don't worry if you forget about coming back to the video, because it's such a great game, it deserves as many eyes on it as possible, and I will have done my part. Starting in the graveyard, arisen by the Bell of Awakening as unkindled, you previously failed to link the fire. You answer the call of duty as you exit this cemetery of ash, coming face to face with the vanguard of the flame, a warrior that was not aroused by the Bell of Awakening in a previous cycle and never met his Firekeeper. There's more lore to Gundyr that I'll try to touch on later, but for now, he takes the title of Udex, essentially a private citizen turned judge in real-world history. His Japanese name is Judge of Ash Gundyr, and he's described as the following. The judge became a scabbard and continued to await ash. His attacks are well choreographed while not being particularly slow, and he's the perfect boss to practice your parries on. After getting him to a threshold of roughly 60% health, he undergoes a massive change as a black pus explodes from his body, this being the pus of man. This marks a change in the fight, the start of Phase 2, which is very well conveyed by the changing of the music, from a peaceful, almost honor-bound, dutiful tune to a more intense and somewhat animalistic or less dignified second phase. I'm going to take this time after the fight to bring up a couple things. Because of my editing style, I generally need to push for higher frame rates, and as you can imagine with a game from 2016, shit do be getting fucky outside of 60 FPS you're intended to play on. This game's normally locked to 60 and it runs flawlessly, but because of changing my FPS, it negatively affects certain things like move speed and parry timings. Don't be like me, just stick to the 60. It's perfectly fine for the game, and after a short while, you won't even realise it's only 60 anymore. It's not worth changing it and facing the repercussions. I'll also try to touch on the lore as much as I can, but I'm definitely going to have to pause from time to time, and I don't want to do that too much and take away from the overall video, so I may rush over some things, like how I haven't spoken about the Pus of Man yet. Anyway, after beating Undead, the player receives the Coiled Sword. Even fighting the abyssal corruption of the Pus of Man, he holds true to his duty of judging Unkindled worthy of attempting to become Lords of Cinder. Udex Gundyr is the first of 3 bosses out of the 25 that don't drop a boss soul, and the only one that has an actual lore reason, which, as you guess, I'm covering in, 2 hours time. Coiled sword in hand and embered by the victory against the Udex, the only way left to go is towards the Firelink Shrine. A shrine for linking the fire. A link shrine for fire. A fire shrine for... Am I having a stroke? Of all the hubs in the Souls games, this one is my favourite. It's got a somber mood to it while still providing comfort and support. People aren't here because they want to be, but because they choose to be. A place of solace in this harsh land that clearly wants to kill us all. The inhabitants of this lovely 5-star hotel in no particular order are the Firekeeper, the best argument for why waifus aren't exclusively cringe anime weeb shit. Hawkwood, he has conniptions.
Gives me conniptions.
Ludleth of Corland, a Lord of Cinder, beloved blacksmith Andre, and the Shrine Handmaid. Oops. That was a genuine accident. As a side note, I wished nothing but pain and agony on the person on the wiki that said nothing but smash in regards to this old decrepit hag. She's most likely a reference to the Firekeepers in Dark Souls 2, but this is one of those mysteries that never gets officially answered. If you accidentally kill this lovely lady and then reload the area, she gets angry at you and raises the prices of her goods. Out of outrage at this horrendous price gouging, a player is likely to kill her again, which makes her raise her prices even higher. It's a pretty funny interaction until you realise you fucked up the Grey Rat quest and now have to pay a year's worth of income on a key that opens one single door. There's also a really neat interaction that I'll bring up later, but 4 hours later. I don't know how long this video is going to be, but if I'm anywhere near to that guess, I'm going to be impressed. Or sad. Or both. With nowhere further to go, the only thing left for the player to do is to interact with the bowl of ash on the floor and use it to warp to the main area of the game. Upon teleporting, the player finds themselves in the city of Lothric, and one thing I'd really like to bring up is how well the world is designed. It's hard to tell what's playable space and what's just visual. I sent this very high quality instructional aid that definitely wasn't made in paint, and highlighted the red sections where there's a boss fight, and anything that isn't in the yellow section on the right is actually playable space. And this is just one section. In this second screenshot, I highlighted other playable areas, this time in blue. That's not even all the areas in base game, as there's huge underground sections, and most of those mountains you can see in the background are actual world geometry, and not just painted sections of a skybox. If you don't take the time to actually look, you could easily miss how expansive the world is meant to be. FromSoft once again decided to make a world that exists outside of the areas you can step, and it's a part of why they're so highly regarded. When playing Elden Ring, I don't feel the same sense of an actual world, which is pretty bad because that's supposed to be a regular place at a normal time, as opposed to Dark Souls 3's whole end of existence, time is crumbling motif. To explain the main enemy type of both here and the overall game, I guess we need another mini lore dive. In Dark Souls 1, you had the Undead, people who accepted this curse to become powerful or otherwise take on duties they couldn't have completed without being undead. There was also people forced into undeath by the main church at the time, the Way of White. Undead that had died too many times, lost their purpose in life, or otherwise gave up and became hollows, because they're essentially soulless husks, a shell of their former being. In the time of DS3, it's believed that while the same kind of concept, unkindled are undead, but the duty of tending to the flame and extending the current age of fire has become a necessary sacrifice of the common dredges, which is why Hawkwood claims that the unkindled can't even die right. In previous ages, linking the fire was the duty of gods or a great champion, whereas now it's just the current Lords of Cinder essentially giving strength to a person to be able to sacrifice their own life to prolong the current age and the current Lord's power. In DS3 there's two types of hollows. There's the original kind, the soulless husks of decay, and then there's those of ill repute, which are aligned with the Dark, the Abyss, or the ideology of Dark Souls 1's Darkstalker Karth. It's like the difference between a regular feral animal and a rabid one. Both of them can fuck you up, but one of them isn't really in control of it. I'm aware I said it'd be a mini lore dive, and I tried to keep it concise, but that's just how Souls lore is. This area, the High Wall of Lothric, introduces explorative players to how NPC quests are done, by allowing you to free the previously mentioned Grey Rat, imprisoned for being a thief. Although, you don't have to do his quest if you don't want to, which is always nice, but for a new player it's a good thing to start as you get a quest reward of the Blue Tearstone Ring, which reduces incoming damage when your health is below 20%. This is a very powerful early game ring, and it even works in reducing non-fatal full damage. The key to Grey Rat Cell is close by, and it's practically right next to the first health flask upgrade, instead of taking hours of gameplay for the average player to find upgrades. The only other person in this area that doesn't want to kill you is Ember, High Priestess of the castle. In fact, not only does she tell you what's needed to make the world right, she even gives the player an item to help protect against invasions. Or if you're feeling pressed for time, you can just murder her where she sits and take all the stuff she had. This also lets you face a late stage boss early, but for the sake of the video, we're going to go with things as intended. I know I alluded to invasions, but I'm mostly not going to touch on them because I might have accidentally made a fucky wucky when installing the Convergence mod, and got banned from online play. So I've never experienced DS3 online. Following the instructions from Emma, or our intuition if we were one of those evil nasty people that murdered an innocent holy woman, we run down the steps into the arena of the next boss, and probably most well-known song of the whole soundtrack because of its prolificacy in memes. Vort of the Boreal Valley, originally not a dog-looking person, but corrupted by a ring given to him by the self-proclaimed pontiff of his hometown. In terms of bosses, Vort is undoubtedly harder than Gundit, and while that's how progression usually works in games, it's more because the actual act of fighting Vort is harder to intuit. Because I've got well over 400 hours in the game, I've decided to handicap myself on the playthrough, and admittedly I still died twice to Vort, so a new player, someone that's not played a Souls game before, would definitely struggle with him. And I know this because my very first experience with Souls games was actually trying to beat Vort back in 2017, dying around 17 times, deciding it's impossible and uninstalling. I just can't count that as my first time playing the game because of amnesia and stuff. I can only recount that because of Discord chat logs. Once Vort hits his second phase and his iconic music starts playing, he becomes very hard to fight for new players because instead of his weapon being an active hitbox, his entire body is. For players that need to get in close to be able to deal damage, the fear of being twatted by a double-decker is almost as bad as actually being twatted by a double-decker. Even if you're behind him as he rushes forwards, there's a chance part of his hitbox will overlap with yours and cause you to take damage, although admittedly the hitboxes are really well made, so it's not a common experience. If he does his breath attack, you can run up and perform a charged heavy attack to instantly poise break him and get a free riposte. Or at least you can if you're not me, because I kinda messed it up after failing to bait him into the charge attack in the first place. I swear I'm actually good at this game, and I start performing better once the rust wears off. After defeating the big scary metal doggy, the doors on the other side of the arena are now able to be opened, leading to a destroyed section of bridge, which you can only cross by hailing some flying demons allied to Lothric, leading on to the Undead Settlement. Just under the drop-off point is a pilgrim called Yol of Londor, seemingly resigned to death like the others that were around him before they passed, seeing no way into the High Wall to complete their pilgrimage. Basically, the Hollows of Londor travelled to Lothric because they became aware that the prince was refusing to link the fire, and they came to claim the power of Cinder in the name of Londor, the Hollows, and everything depraved. Making your way through the Undead Settlement, one of the first sights you see is a bunch of workers surrounding a burning tree with a praying evangelist at the foot. Visual storytelling is a huge part of the Souls games, especially proven by the channel The Tarnished Archaeologist, accurately explaining the original pre-cut story of Dark Souls 1 just using like 3 statues and fucking brickwork. Seeing a burning tree with a voice of religion can hint that the linking of the first flame is a perversion of the natural cycle and not the ultimate saving grace of humanity or Earth. That what we're told is necessary may only be one part of the equation. Furthermore, and I want to preface this by saying I was raised evangelical as a child, but people forcing their religion and their views onto others is generally, it's usually done by the bad guys of history. Doubly ironic considering I'm British. This burning of the tree is ultimately a rejection of the local faith in favour of the enlightenment offered by these evangelists, who are secretly just collecting victims to sacrifice to the Lord of Cinder, Aldrich. The boss of this area is the curse-rotted Greatwood, quite literally a tree that the workers of the settlement use to seal away their curses, until those curses corrupted it, turning it into a pus-filled abomination that the workers still yet worship. With the lore being the way it is, it's easy to read into the meanings you want, but I believe this is a way of saying that curses in the dark is also a perverse alignment, but it's also equally valid to say that there's no major lore implications, or just an extension of the corruption of the evangelists, Aldrich, and their worshipping of the deep. The boss is good at stalling the fight with slow and hard-hitting attacks. It's a somewhat janky fight for new players, but once you understand the jank, it's really not a hard fight melee, but magic isn't a particularly fun fight from what I remember. Overall, the nature of the game and boss design makes them hard for new players, so I won't bring it up again unless it's notably difficult. Moving on from the Undead Settlement, once everything's over and done with, you come to a particularly brooding and rather rude individual called Egon, a Knight of Carim, as he yaps about getting no action or some shit. Knights of Carim, modelled after the Archbishop Morn, dedicate their lives and careers to one single maiden. In Egon's case, it's the poor lady locked in the cage nearby, Irina. The Morn armour set has a notable weakness to darkness, which is a nice little tidbit until I get into their lore later on. You can free Irina from her cell after an ambush of rats that aren't afraid to completely fuck you up. While nearby you can see the first world-spawning miracle-casting catalyst, the Saint's Talisman. Foreshadowing is fun. Moving on from the cell is an elevator and what I guess we should call a puzzle. As the platform raises upon approach, we see one of the beloved Onion Knights, fan favourite Sigurd of Katarina, as he deliberates over trying to find a way to the top of the tower. Using the 2 brain cells afforded to me by being British, by sending down the lift but not staying on it, the other platform lowers down for you to step on, to take to the top of the tower, and a very friendly giant that once is befriended will help anytime. Taking the platform back down, you can see a scaffolding partway down at the same time you hear the familiar, pensive hum of an onion. This is just to get the player's attention and to tell them there's more to explore, but is done so diegetically so as to not break the immersion. Stepping onto the scaffolding, you find Sigurd once again, contemplating how to pass the fire demon now blocking both of your progress. He sounds like an overconfident coward, but upon engaging with the beast, he declares his support by your side and he actually helps fight the demon. Victory leads to a celebration from this lovable clove of garlic, and he provides you with a hearty drink and a toast before taking a nap. Moving on, you find a ring that increases the damage you deal, the less weight you have equipped to your character. And getting something like this early on is a good way to incentivize a different playstyle, forgoing the Havel strats and heavy poise trading blows, either for people that prefer more of a challenge, or just as a way to spice up the game and keep it replayable. Further on is another ring, this time increasing stamina recovery speed, a very good ring for new players. Another item in this room is the armor set of Mirror Knights, a welcome reference to the best character of Dark Souls 2, along with her sword which you can gain from the soul of the curse-rotted Greatwood. It's a possible way to retcon Lucatil's story from DS2, trying to say that she travelled far in an attempt to regain her humanity by sealing her curse of hollowing into a tree spirit that was the Greatwood, although it could just be a reference and nothing more. Returning to the cliff underside bonfire, you can turn back on yourself and find a caged prisoner, Corx, a pyromancer of the Great Swamp Apparently I used whom. Corx, a pyromancer of the Great Swamp, whom you can free and he will become a vendor in Firelink. Having covered pretty much all of the important parts of this area, the next step is to descend, traversing the Road of Sacrifices, although not before being impeded by an Outrider Knight, the same order as Vort, less corrupted by the rings, on orders to watch over a daughter of the Erythilian royal family. If you choose to fight, this is the first introduction to non-boss status effects, and what I'm going to say is the first official, as I don't think anyone that can be hit enough times by Vort to even proc Frostbite would actually be able to survive being frostbitten. He also drops the Irithyll Straightsword, a very solid weapon, and likely the first one a player will find that upgrades with Twinkling Titanite instead of regular Titanite, or boss weapons that use scales to upgrade. Through the doors and onwards, you meet Anri of Astora and their friend and compatriot Horus the Hushed. Anri will inform the player on their shared duty and offer service in return for the player offering service to Anri as well. You can kill them if you want to, but I don't want to because they're important to a certain questline, and anyway, I've already sated my bloodlust with Emma. Okay, I can't bring myself to do it because I feel bad for them, alright? Down the hill from your bonfire is the Crucifixion Woods, a forked path between two areas. So for the sake of the video, I'll be following the route that makes the most sense to take. The left path takes you to a derelict building in which we find Orbeck of Inheim, a sorcerer and ex-assassin of the Dragon School of Sorcery that was exiled when he became undead. I'll cover Undeath at a time that makes more sense, but it won't be long now, I promise. Speaking to Orbeck with 10 or more intelligence, you can convince him to teach you sorceries, at which point he relocates to the Firelink Shrine. On the other side of the room, on the same floor as Orbeck, there's a broken staircase where you can find blue bug pellets, which reduce incoming magic damage. This is something that FromSoft do really well with the Souls games, leaving items that help your next boss fight close nearby for explorative players. This happens a lot and is seemingly generally referred to as an occult club moment from DS1, where you can get an occult-infused club just before ONS, a boss fight where they're weak to that particular type of damage. If you freed Arena from her cage, you can find Egon's summon sign directly below the area where Orbeck was standing, which can only mean there's a boss fight nearby. The Crystal Sage is an interesting boss, utilising magic attacks to keep players at range. Funny enough, the Sage is one of the easiest bosses to parry, even though there's only one attack that can be parried in the first place. Crystal Sage is akin to a glass cannon, very easy to completely destroy as long as you avoid their magic attacks, but that magic has some serious damage, and unironically, on my New Game Plus run for this video, the Sage was the first boss to kill me, even though I did Dancer, Osiris and Gunned it early, just after Vort. Phase 2 sees the Sage cloning themselves, the clones only having 1 HP, and the original being differentiated by the colour of their magic attacks. You can actually also predict where the real Sage spawns based on the crystals on the ground. Phase 1 it never spawns on a crystal, whereas Phase 2 it generally spawns at the furthest crystal away from the player. This Sage created an uneasy alliance with Farron's Undead Legion, and taught them quick to learn and quicker to use sorceries, as well as refining a sorcery for the leader of the Legion's daughter, Hazel. I'll admit, I only explained this to bring up lore I've never been able to find out anywhere else. Nobody mentions that fucking Hazel is the daughter of the Legion. That's so cool, man. There's so much the majority are missing out on. I wish I had the ability to do a full lore dive someday and just cover the cool shit nobody else seems to know. Alright, I have a video to finish. The exit fog gate that clears upon the defeat of the Sage leads on towards the Cathedral of the Deep, the base of operations for the Evangelists and Aldrich, although he's no longer here. In my opinion, this area is the first area that it's really worth sprinting past every single enemy you can. As bad as the Crucifixion Woods was, the Cathedral has infinite respawning enemies in a couple sections, some knights that deal insane damage, and a lot of status-inducing enemies. As much as I enjoy a torch being able to stop the maggots that cause the bleed build-up, it took me way too many playthroughs to find that out, and it just doesn't seem particularly sensical that eating a plant you may not have even found yet could instantly cause maggots to stop devouring you. The number of enemies between the first chapel bonfire and the next one is too many to fight, with the Grave Wardens able to finish you in like 3 hits if you didn't know to bring enough health. Not to say it's a bad area, it's just you're definitely not intended to fight every enemy here. As long as the player has the first of the 2 DLCs, the first bonfire in the Cathedral area, the Cleansing Chapel, will contain a man in prostration, praying or maybe begging to a merciful goddess, Mother of the Forlorn. Teensy little lore rant here, but people think this Mother of the Forlorn is Velka of Dark Souls 1 fame, but it kinda can't be. The worship of Velka is banned, leading to the only shrine of her being hidden in the catacombs of the Undead Settlement. They wouldn't allow the open supporting of her so close to the Cathedral of the Deep, whereas the support of the goddess Kaitha allows followers to utilise the dark despite it being forbidden by the Archbishop, the dark being something the followers of the Deep use, as well as her tears being used to bring comfort to suffering humans. Users of the forbidden arts being exiled and sad or suffering people are both examples of the Forlorn, and I mean, she's literally depicted as weeping. People generally don't weep without being sad. So, shout out to the Reddit user that decided Velka had to be the mother of Arya and Mother of the Forlorn, because Arya is a child, and the Japanese script for small looks like a small person, and the script for person looks like someone splitting the dark soul of man. Like, yeah, the Japanese loved what Japanese company From Software did, especially their hit game series Dark Souls, published by Japanese company Bandai Namco, based off of the Japanese manga Berserk by Japanese writer Kentaro Miura. And because of the love of the Japanese people, they decided that small person would look like a child splitting the dark soul of man into every human. People ask me why I hate Reddit, and, well, that's definitely part of the reason. Upon entrance of the cathedral proper, one of the first things you come across is a trap, an enticing goodie left in plain view, which, once collected, causes the statue of the goddess Kaitha to weep toxic sludge. You know, because the weeping goddess has fallen. Anyway, the second shortcut since the Cleansing Chapel, and the first one inside the chapel, is found here, and it's definitely a sight for sore eyes. I'm pretty sure the footage I'm going to use for that rant mostly skips the enemies, but it's a very rough area, and the rest of this area is very hostile. If you don't respect the enemies here, they're likely to kill you. Opposite the shortcut elevator is a door to an open square with a giant. Fighting him isn't too easy on this ledge, but you can find a way to the floor to fight him, or you can just ignore him. Just beyond the giant is a chest, except it's actually a mimic, and it's got a special divine tome inside that you can give to Irina, although I wouldn't recommend it. Continuing downwards and not dying to the Cathedral Knight will have you crossing paths with only one of 2 deeper cursed in the game, creatures violated by the Saint of the Deep in the same way the Outrider Knights were, purely because Aldrich wanted others to share in the enjoyment he finds in causing agony and death. Speaking of agony and death, this area is the invasion ground for returning NPC Kirk. Originally Knight of Thorns, he's now a Longfinger, a disciple of the local deity Rosaria and Scourge of the Undead. I'm not going to speak on the lore of Rosaria, because some of it's unfounded and some of it is way too heavy for me to talk about. There's a link in the description if you want to, but heads up if you're sensitive to rough subjects. Directly behind where Kirk invades is the second and the final useful shortcut to the Cleansing Chapel. And it lets you choose another fork, the decision to go straight to the boss fight or to continue exploring, with the exploration route leading to Rosaria and being important for Hazel and Ringfinger Leonard, who I haven't mentioned yet, but I swear we're just a couple minutes away from that now. If instead of taking that route, and not entering the boss fight, you can find a different route and come across a second Onion Knight that lets you in on a secret cache of treasure. Sounding very familiar, it's not until you're halfway across the bridge that it drops you down, and the knight reveals to be patches in the stolen armour of our loving little shallot, Sigurd. After this encounter, Patches will relocate to near Rosaria's bonfire, and you have a chance to buy the Katarina armour set from him to gift back to Sigurd. I covered that more than I initially intended to, just because, despite the fact I had to rant for a bit, there's so much to say just about the Cathedral. I'm going to try and bring it back to the more important things now. The boss of that area is the Deacons of the Deep, a mob boss fight with a twist. If you hadn't worked out by now, many DS3 bosses have unique gimmicks, and this one is that the boss health bar only goes down by killing the enemy that has the red aura surrounding them, until 5 or 6 of those have been defeated and the Archdeacon spawns in. There's a secondary gimmick in that you can only spend roughly 8 minutes in the fight before curse build-up will insta-kill the player, although it's not likely any normal player will run into this. Killing the Archdeacon will reward the player with a small doll, as well as the regular boss soul you get. However, if you sit at the bonfire and stand up again, you can get the clothes of the now slain Archdeacon. Now that we've got the small doll, I can finally start talking about the NPCs of Firelink. I'm just glad I can stop alluding to something I'll talk about later. Being the main hub for the player, many important NPCs will show up here from time to time, all of which important in their own way. Starting with the best one first, the Firekeeper. As a Firekeeper, she can turn the souls collected by the player into strength through touching the darkness within her, proving Gwyn right in his fear of the power of the dark soul of man, a shard inside each and every human with the power to consume others for strength and power. Firekeepers have to be blind because of what happened to the first. With her eyes, she saw a world without fire, a betrayal to all that she and everyone else knew. A world without fire is a world without power, the end of an age and a lack of future. Although with how the world is, cannibals being revered for might without virtue, a corrupted army fighting everything including themselves, deserters and cowards alike, could a world without fire really be so bad? Speaking of blind people, we've got dear Irina of Karim, the blind nun we saved 6 pages back that was trapped in a cage. Fun fact, her voice actor is the same person that voices Lucatil in DS2, and she was the only good part of that game. Being a nun from Karim, it's likely she's a part of the religious movement, the Way of White, a religion based around Gwyn and his virtues, with the patron and deity Caitha firmly seated in their beliefs. Irina came to the land of Lothric to become a Firekeeper, although had given up before we first met her, afraid of the dark, little creatures that nibble at her. Although feeling weak and unfit to tend the flames as is a Firekeeper's duty, she vowed herself to aiding the Ashen Champion and will provide the player with miracles, essentially stories and memories which have the power to provide support, both offensive and defensive. And to this end, Irina tasks the player with finding Braille tomes of divine nature. Only divinity is a fickle thing and religion is largely subjective, the player can provide her with 4 tomes, 2 which align with her views, and 2 which are forbidden, glorifying and utilising the dark, which she will reluctantly accept to aid her saviour and champion, no matter how badly she fears them. But doing that is evil, and if you give her those, you're a bad person that needs to rethink their life choices. If you give her the 2 good tomes, and purchase all the miracles she sells without buying a single dark miracle, she relocates from her original spot at the shrine to the Tomb of Firekeeper's past, having gained the faith and power to become one herself, no longer afraid of the dark, but instead able to use it to strengthen her champion of Ash. If you're a dick and give her a dark tome and buy a dark miracle, Egon will take her away from the shrine and become hostile to the player, showing that despite his demeanour, he is true to his word and will do what he can to protect his maiden. If you buy all dark miracles, Irina will no longer be able to feel your presence and will succumb to the corruption of the dark. Irina is a nice person that deserves head pats and cookies, not despair and desolation. Despair and Desolation, however, is perfect for Carla, heretical sorceress and supposed daughter of Zully the Witch, a legend of the worlds. Her voice actor also voiced Yuria in Demon Souls. We're nowhere near to introducing Carla properly into the storyline, but this saves me having to pause later on. saved from a cell in the Irithyll dungeons, she seems to resent the only spells she knows being abyssal in nature, one handed down from her mother, and the other being a possible extension for her love of someone, either unrequited or unfounded. Having saved her and speaking to her at the shrine, she states that humans are of the dark, and you are no different. Some may avert their eyes, but the truth remains the truth. Despite being told the aim is to link the flame, to extend the Age of Fire, plenty of characters make the argument, whether intentional or not, for an Age of Dark. You're able to give those dark-aligned miracle tomes to Carla in order to buy from them, without being a dick. Without locking yourself out of content, as well as some types of pyromancy that are either aligned with the dark or just for witches, only to be learned from a woman. Pyromancers are able to utilize a part of themselves, the pyromancy flame, in order to cast their spells. This would be a pretty fire transition to another character. Cornyx of the Great Swamp, a land renowned for their pyromancies and pyromancers alike. This little bundle of joy surrounded by the dead carcasses of crows is how you learn most of the... Fuck it, I'm tired of saying that word, I can barely pronounce the letter R in the first place. He's how you learn most of the fire magic in the game, save for the ones taught from the tomes you give Carla. I explained how one could only be taught by a woman, but the other is one he will refuse to teach because it delves into the depths of men where an untouchable flame resides. Only one terribly afflicted or burdened by deep sorrow could begin to understand this. Also, they're definitely crows and not ravens, because his name is a play on the Latin name for a hooded crow. Kinda odd that he's not wearing a hood, but instead a blindfold to hide his face. Hide his face is most of the lore we know about Ringfinger Leonard. Finger of Rosaria, deity and potential descendant of Guinevere. Receiving burns to his entire body, but worst of all to his face, he's a former member of royalty that tracked down ways to heal his body. However, when he met Rosaria, who had her tongue cut out by her firstborn, he refused to heal his burns. There's no law reason for this, but it's likely in solidarity for this wronged maiden, in which now he's sworn fealty. The first meeting will provide the player with cracked red-eye orbs to allow for invading other players' worlds in an attempt to obtain their Ember and strengthen themselves with the power of stolen souls. Killing people to steal things sounds a lot like returning Souls character Patches though. There's really not too much to say here, he's kind of a prick, he'll attempt to kill you a couple different times, and the only good thing to say about him is that he helped save the life of Greyrat during his questline, using the Katarina armor he stole off of Sigurd. He's a merchant, but honestly, the only two items that are really useful are the alluring skulls to lure enemies away, and the human pine resin. Speaking of Greyrat though, he's a friendly little thief that the player can employ to go out on loot runs. The first time, he knows he'll be safe as he knows the areas and he says everyone is dead or hollowed away anyway. He's a lovable goof, but he'd rather run into a death trap with no chance of returning for someone he considers a friend than to sit around doing nothing and dying like a petty rat. Orbeck of Vinheim, as I said earlier, used to be an assassin for the Vinheim Dragon School, but now he wishes to just play the role of scholar, looking for old or forgotten sorceries. He makes a pact with the player to join in exchange for scrolls and information. Another NPC will task the player with killing Orbeck for certain reasons, but this is a ploy and Orbeck truly wants nothing more than knowledge and dedicating himself to no longer being the fool that was forced to kill to pursue his fascinations. Yol of Londor, a pilgrim from a faraway land we know very little about. Taken into our service after he failed to die as was ordained, he believes this champion of Ash and their divine flame could be his new calling. Being a sorcerer in times gone, he offers what he knows, but he also offers a chance to draw out true strength, a right that accumulates dark sigils, artifacts that can negate or bypass the dark sign, and allowing for the darkness inherent to man to flow freely. There's a part way later on that's better suited to this, but after completing Yol's questline, he dies, and next to where he lays, there's a woman clad in black, Yuria of Londor, who thanks you for redeeming Yol's soul, although it could be that she only feigns friendliness, because Yol shepherded the Ashen One to the ideology of the Sable Church, a religion antithetical to Lordran's Way of White. Instead of worshipping Gwyn and all he does, the Sable Church supports the Abyss and the end of the Age of Fire. To this point, Yuria may actually be the one to kill Yol, as he was ordained to die, and his failure could be an affront to their religion, one created by the three sisters Lilian, Yuria, and Elfrida. Yuria, the middle child, is the one that quests the player with killing Orbeck, saying that he proclaims himself the Lord of Hollows. Although the reason why she asks this of you is unknown, Yuria's quest is necessary for one of the 3 endings this game has, so she's a pretty big character in the story, but as to the game itself, she doesn't have all too much importance. Someone that is important, however, is Andre of Astora, the blacksmith of the shrine. Having been around since the Age of the Gods in DS1, he returns in all his gruff glory to aid the champions of Ash in their goal to link the fire, although he seems to care for nothing more than smithing and a giant he once called a dear friend. Andre can upgrade your weapons, infuse them, and he can also increase the number of heals your Estus Flask gets. He's someone you'll be seeing a lot of, so it feels a shame that he doesn't have too much to say. Also hailing from Astora is Unri and their friend Horace. They're the only 2 children that were able to escape from Aldrich, monster, cannibal, and former cleric of the Way of White, or at least the bastardization of what the religion should have been. Unri is Ash, just like the player, but their main goal is to slay Aldrich and put an end to his monstrous actions for the children he knew, the children he was a part of, and the ones that are yet to be doomed to the fate they managed to avoid. Horace doesn't have too much lore, as he can't speak for himself. His armour is the set of a corrupt executioner that took his tongue. As far as I know, that's the extent of the collective knowledge around Horace, other than that they're members of the Way of Blue, a branch religion splitting from the original Dark Moon Blades in Dark Souls 1. The Dark Moon Blades are really cool, and so is Cirrus of the Sunless Realms, a warrior on a journey to slay Rosaria's fingers, including Kraton the Wanderer, from the lands of Drangleic in Dark Souls 2. This is her duty as a Dark Moon, as they slay invaders and sinners alike. However, Cirrus's true goal is to find her grandfather Hodrick and put an end to his murderous madness at the end of her sword. She starts off not caring about the Ashen One, but after giving the Dream Chaser's ashes to the Shrine Handmaid, Cirrus reappears and offers for the Ashen One to call upon her should the need arise. Although never explicitly stated, it's heavily implied that Cirrus is actually the granddaughter of the Shrine Handmaid, and the ashes possibly being that of a child of the Handmaid. I'm not going to talk about Sparkly because there's nothing to talk about, which leaves just one more Shrine character to reintroduce, Hawkwood. This poor fellow's resigned himself to dejection, feeling that he's worthless and there's no point in trying to change how the world is. He will provide the player with mostly unhelpful information, but throughout the game he will reward the player with items as a way of lending help, almost being able to redeem himself by the end. His full name is Hawkwood the Deserter, and by the uniform he wears, as well as the description of the shield he leaves behind, he was once a member of the game's first Lords of Cinder, Farron's Undead Legion, before giving up his sword. Farron Keep, a horrible poisonous swamp and possible home to the lost land of Ulasil, now home only to Basilisks, Gru and the Undead Legion, which were modelled after Knight Artorias, both in fashion and in motive. The first poison swamp of DS3, this is generally one of the most hated areas of the game. And I mean, yeah, it's a giant puzzle level that's just go here, press interact, go there, press interact, and do it one more time to open a giant door. It's not the greatest area, but it's not terrible either. It's got loads of upgrade materials, 2 spell scrolls, an Estus shard, and an Ember to give Andre. And it's not too big of an area, so it generally doesn't outstay its welcome. This area is where you find 3 of only 4 Dark Wraiths in the game, and given how little the player will see of them, I can't help but think this is an explicit reference to the 4 Kings of DS1. Otherwise, why go to the bother of making their shit just for one not quite mini boss fight and 3 random world mobs, you know? Just behind the pair of Dark Wraiths, you can find the Miracle Atonement, a tale passed to the exiles of the Sable Church, which they believe will bring them forgiveness, when it actually attracts more attention from foes, stating that cursed journeys too must come to an end. Just a neat little thing to show that, for as much as I've shown support for the Sable Church, they're still dicks. I think I've covered enough about the area that it's not over too quickly, so I can finally talk about the boss of the area. The Abyss Watchers. Warriors fighting the corruption of the Abyss wherever it shows up, sworn to an oath by the blood of a wolf that's probably Sith, but again, never explained. These guys would destroy entire cities at the first sign of abyssal corruption just to keep it in check. They're the reason there's all these swords in the ground all around the area, as a sign of respect to fallen warriors. Although it's actually a misinterpretation, because the swords around the grave of Artorias that they modelled their ways after wasn't a sign of respect, but the weapons of looters and raiders that were dispatched by Sif, protecting her master's grave. Although technically that's not the grave of Artorias, but the fun thing about FromSoft lore is that we can pick and choose which bits we like, and ignore the bits we don't. Although I'm pretty sure that's just describing religion these days. Anyway. While not being my favourite boss, this is definitely my favourite fight. It's always fun, and it's a nice spectacle. As opposed to the Deacon's fight, this is a proper gank, because it can become a 3v1 in the first phase if you're not careful or you don't know what you're doing. This is probably the boss I've been able to parry the least, other than Lorien, but it's probably just me being dumb. Something I really enjoy about the Lords of Cinder is that once you get them to phase 2, they ember themselves just like the player's able to do. And I enjoy the thematic irony of them using the power of the fire they refuse to kindle to try and beat this worthless pile of ash that wasn't even strong enough to kindle the flame in the first place. Inspecting the back of the mausoleum after the Watcher fight, a mechanism opens a hidden staircase down to a huge catacombs. Catacombs? Bonehouse. I kinda hate this Bonehouse more than the Firekeeper swamp, so while going through stuff, I'll just keep talking about the Legion for a second. You can turn in the soul from them to make their weapon, parrying dagger and all, or you can straight up make Artorias' sword, coated in Abyss Splooge, and both of them get a 20% bonus to abyssal enemies, kinda explaining that the Pus of Man is a scourge from the Abyss, or maybe that as the Abyss was originally from the torment of one human, that something inherent to humans is causing corruption throughout the worlds. Back to the Bonehouse, you can do part of Unri's quest, which has you killing Horus because he went hollow for some reason. The Bonehouse was built on top of Izalith and seemingly adjoins the Great Hollow, seeing burned arch trees through a nearby hole in the cave wall. You can fight the old Demon King, the last living witness to the chaos caused by the Witch of Izalith. The main boss is High Lord Wolnir, once a mighty conqueror, now just a gimmick fight. I honestly don't have much to say here because I've genuinely only died to him like 3 times in almost 500 hours of playing. He's got this obnoxious smoke attack that seems a little bit inconsistent to me, but maybe my brightness is just too low and I'm not seeing the start of the vape cloud. The biggest challenge is being able to pull off a charged heavy attack before he moves his arm for the 5th fucking time. In regards to lore, he got corrupted by the Abyss and cried out to the gods, just to kill and loot a sword and 3 bracelets from some clerics to stave off his impending death. That's why breaking his bangles gets him sucked off by the Abyss. Do people even call them bangles anymore? Honestly, the Bonehouse isn't a terrible area, I just don't particularly like it. It's boring, there's too many enemies, they really kicked up the difficulty with this area. At least the next area is cooler, and I swear that isn't a pun about the snow. Irithyll of the Boreal Valley. If I was a smart person, I'd make some joke about the weather, but I played Siege for 5,000 hours, so I'm clearly not a smart person. The moon is always shining over this place because of extremely powerful magic from everyone's favourite Dark Souls 1 Snekusi, Gwendolyn. The magic is so strong, it even infused the insects and local fauna and that's how we got blue bug pellets and rime blue moss clumps. The first enemy we get to see after it ambushes us from behind is one of only 3 Sullivan's beasts in the game, originally Outrider Knights, fully transformed by the Pontiff rings. This is another one of those branching paths, but as they're both essential and more or less have to be completed back to back, it's not worth talking about it. The world mobs get a lot more dangerous from here on, so it's not worth fighting them unless you want something that they drop. This area culminates in possibly the hardest boss fight of the base game because of how wild his attack chains are. Pontiff Sullivan, this guy's either a pushover because you learnt to parry him, or he's a butthead because he has so many attacks. Okay, so I just took a look at some of my recordings I had, and honestly I just played like shit. I think it's fully a skill issue from me. Maybe I need to play a Pontiff only run to get better at the fight. He has longer attack chains than most other bosses, and his dodge timing seems slightly awkward, paired with his Phase 2 clone mechanic that was stolen by Elden Ring's DLC. It means you have to dodge twice as much, risk running out of stamina just to have a tighter attack window than the first phase. He's not a bad boss, he's cool aesthetically, and his lore is pretty unique, hailing from the painted world of Ariandel. He was a skilled but bored sorcerer, leaving to experience the things the non-native inhabitants of the painting were looking to escape. He found the profaned flame, an inextinguishable flame under the city of Irithyll, and with that his ambition rose to dangerous levels, corrupting the holy knights of the city and enacting a coup, holding Gwendolyn and Yorshka hostage to prevent their followers being able to take action out of fear of either leader being killed. I started fighting Pontiff on a grave mistake, and I didn't finish until the end of Rainy Day. They're not even on the same album. The section after Sullivan is either the dumbest enemy spam of the entire game, or a fight against 2 NPCs and like 3 giants, just depending on which side you decide to run down. We get to see the return of the Silver Knights, sentinels from the Age of Gods, standing guard just outside the Dark Moon Tomb. It is a dangerous game to reuse such pivotal areas from a previous game, because if it doesn't land it can just be seen as a lazy move or just nostalgia bait. Thankfully, Anor Londo doesn't come across like that. For most players they won't notice that most areas are supposed to be DS1 areas ravaged by time and decay, so other than seeing the corpse of the Fair Lady and the Quelana Pyromancy Tome, if they even find it hidden away, this reveal is the first reused area. Instead of being a feckless cash grab, it's a nice homage, and thematically it really does make sense. The game spends however long building up the new City of Kings, built on the ruins of the previous. Time and politics have clearly destroyed both of these beautiful cities, and instead of telling us or ignoring it, we get to experience it firsthand, which is really a much better mechanic of storytelling. Otherwise we get somehow Palpatine returned. On my first playthrough, the boss's area, Aldrich, was the hardest Lord of Cinder, because he's got one very unfair tracking attack, and the way he is just made me struggle. Well, that, and there's not really much competition with the Lords of Cinder. I've covered a bunch of his lore already, so I'll skip over to the start of the other branched path in this area. Actually, before I do that, upon defeating Aldrich and going back to the shrine, the handmaid will sell a unique item that says that Cirrus is going to visit her grandfather in the Pit of Hollows. This lets the player join in on fighting Hodrick in the hole that was opened up while fighting the cursed rotted Greatwood. Hodrick is dangerous as fuck here, and he will very happily parry an attacking player before completely decimating their health in a single riposte. Avoiding that painful a death, victory leads to a sunset shield being placed at a grave just before the shrine, as a sign of respect to the family member she just had to put down to save him from himself. This also opens Cirrus to offer her service in knighthood to the Ashen One, and making her available for a couple future fights. Distant Manor. A manor that is distant. I'm not doing that joke again. There's a lot of things to mention, but honestly I saw a speedrun route to get through almost instantly, and I just take that. It's not fun enough for me to remember to play it normally, which is why I'm just going to fly through this. There's an NPC fight that I used in that video at the start, And apparently on New Game Plus, he does more damage than the final boss. Straight up two-shot me. He may have had a baby with a witch. His daughter may be locked in these jails. The area behind Albert is a prison complex, originally home only to a giant, but then they made cells for humans after. The jailers used to live in the city below. They can reduce your max HP to 1 just by staring at you. I was seething my first time around because it just seemed so bullshit and I couldn't do anything. Now I just sprint straight past them. There's plenty of failed experiments, which was my nickname in school, and there's a lot of giant rats. This is where you find and free Carlo. She's the one that might be Alva's daughter. Technically everyone's favourite little... I'm running out of things to call him. Apparently leeks are related to onions. And chives. Anyway, everyone's favourite bundle of chives is locked down here, but we have to free him from the next area, which is conveniently where we're headed, as there's nothing else important here. Descending the stairs of the dungeon leads to the profaned capital, a buttload of ladders, and Dark Souls 2's best waifu, Laddersmith Gilligan. This area, ravaged by a flame of sin and ambition, literally, looks like it survived pretty well, and that's because it did. The profaned flame burned nothing but flesh. There's very little lore, so I'm just going to throw out something that sounds correct to me, but it is just conjecture, and I could be wrong about the intentions. The flame is said to be abyssal and to corrupt the hearts of those that wield it. There's gold and trinkets all over the place. It's a city of greed and nothing but the corpses of inhabitants annihilated. Someone could easily draw a parallel to New Londo from Dark Souls 1, where greed and abyssal corruption ran rampant. Whether it's a nod to, an homage, or just a coincidence, we don't really know, and we probably never will. Can't forget that this series is written primarily in Japanese, before being translated by others. Sometimes things can get lost in translation, so we'd have to look for synonyms and try to ascertain what the intentions were. Like I said, you can free the human leek here, as well as get a scroll for Orbeck. Yorm is the boss of the area, and he's a gimmick boss, but I don't find him too bad. You can kill him solo very easily. I considered killing him without the Storm Ruler just for the video, but I did this once in the Convergence mod and that was enough for me. His soundtrack fucks though, really helps with the mood. If you freed Sigurd, then his quest culminates here, as he's the friend of Yorm that vowed to kill him if he ever came back to life. Honestly, his lore is really cool, so I'm just going to read a section from the fandom wiki. Long ago, the grand giant Yorm, descendant of an ancient conqueror, was asked to lead the people once subjugated, serving as both their blade and shield. When there were those who doubted him, he gave them a giant-slaying sword to show his trustworthiness. He risked everything for his people in the front lines, fighting valiantly as a one-man vanguard. It is stated that he lost someone dear to him. As a result, he forsook his great shield. Afterwards, he notched his machete to allow for two-hand use, giving him an even more ferocious fighting style. At some point, lonely Yorm befriended Sigurd of Katarina, who became a dear friend of his. Due to a curse triggered by the 4 female relatives of an unknown oracle, which also turned them into careless, greedy creatures, the profaned flame, a flame that never goes out, formed. Yorm became a Lord of Cinder to put the profaned flame to rest, even as they spoke insincerely of his role. However, after he became a Lord of Cinder, this hellish flame fell out of the sky and destroyed the city, yet consuming naught but human flesh, incinerating the human inhabitants. The flame, despite deriving from the dark and the abyss, actively sought to harm humanity. Before burning in the first flame, he gave his other Storm Ruler to Sigurd. Once Yorm's suffering is dealt with, assuming he was the final of the 3 Lords of Cinder so far, the player gets summoned to the chapel on the High Wall, where they previously spoke to Emma and totally didn't kill her. There's no way we were the last person to see her alive. She was happy and full of life when we left. Having now defeated 3 of the 4 runaway Lords of Cinder, Emma now tasks the player with making Prince Lothric follow his life's calling and become a Lord. This happens regardless of whether you kill her or not, and it's clearly a mechanic to protect new players that killed her for no reason. Defeated the bosses so far, and have no clue what to do now. Even if it does ruin the immersion to a certain aspect, it at least does what it's meant to as a protective measure. If the player didn't murder Emma, then she dies here and the player receives a bowl, which, approaching the statue behind where Emma sat, will trigger a cutscene and the next boss fight. Dancer of the Boreal Valley, supposed daughter of Guinevere, child of royalty and enslaved before being deformed by Sullivan for the crime of being born into a family. She is now a beast in a malformed shell of her former identity. This fight was a massive roadblock, but now I can enjoy it for what it is. I think this fight is actually really well done. It's said that a lot of Dark Souls fights feel like a dance between two people, but this one quite literally is one. Her damage is high, her attacks are often, and her ass is fat. What is not to love? Dancer is the boss I've managed to no-hit the most, not including the painfully easy ones like Udex and Vort. Mastering this fight is one of the most rewarding feelings of the entire game, and I feel like it was part of the template for Elden Ring, where bosses attack more often, for higher damage and with increased randomness. On phase transition, Dancer starts a large Beyblade attack, and from what I can tell, there's no way to tell how many spins she's going to do. I've had her do 7 spins in one go, and then 11 the next time. You can cheese the fight really easily with a summon and the Miracle Gnaw, or the more dangerous Doris's Gnawing, but unless you're doing a challenge run or you just cannot beat her, but want to see the rest of the game, cheesing her is really going to ruin your overall enjoyment. Finishing your dance leads you to the final branching path of the game. Going straight on leads further into the story, while going left takes you to additional bosses, so that's where we'll go now. The Consumed King's Gardens does what it says on the tin. Probably the shortest area, it's full of enemies that it's just better to ignore and sprint the 15 seconds it takes to get to the boss. Osiris, former ruler of the land of Lothric, became maddened in the pursuit of knowledge and a way to fix his son's affliction. His research led him to the heretical knowledge in the Grand Archives and research on Seath, believing that the answer to his problem was to be the power of dragons and siring a child of scales. You can summon Hawkwood for this fight as the start of his redemption arc, and I think he gets a good story by the end. Oh, I also didn't have anywhere else to throw this in, but on the fandom wiki, if you read Seath's lore, apparently he fucked Gwyn's mum. Proceeding on from that act of regicide and going through an illusory wall, you find yourself back in the Untended Graves but at nighttime. Some way, somehow, the player finds himself back in time, or maybe forward into the next cycle in order to beat the shit out of Gunda a second time. Or technically a first time. Time travel always gets confusing. There's an invasion by Daughter of Crystal Crimehild, and given that she's wearing a Firekeeper outfit, and very decidedly not blind, she may have killed a previous Firekeeper. Area boss is Gundyr before he got corrupted, so he gets more karate moves and very anime red eyes on phase 2. His attacks can chain you into getting hit like 3 or 4 times, and he very aggressively punishes healing with a charge attack. So if you're not parrying him, it's a tough fight for sure, although just like Udex, it's really fun to learn to parry him. Just behind Gundyr's arena is a gaggle of Black Knights, and while I skipped over their first introduction, they're really out of place here. Technically it makes sense, but on the other hand it kinda doesn't. Entering the dark version of the shrine, you find it empty save for the shrine handmaid. Obligatory. If you've spoken to her here without speaking to her in the normal shrine beforehand, then she has a different dialogue when you go back to the normal shrine. If you kill the handmaid in the dark shrine, she doesn't resurrect like she does in the main shrine, which is interesting, but it's most likely an oversight, as she's supposed to be bound to the shrine by a curse. This area dead ends, so let's go to the other route. Going straight on from Dancer Bonfire leads to the upper castle and the Dragon Barracks area, although if you ask me, it's a little small for dragons to sleep here. I have almost 500 hours at the time of writing, and I still have no idea how you're supposed to do the area with the dragons breathing fire. It also doesn't make sense for dragons to be infected with the pus of man, because, well, they're not man. Dragon Slayer Armor, a great first phase soundtrack utterly ruined by the second phase. You can summon Cirrus for the fight, but she doesn't stand a chance and will very quickly die, if she hasn't already been knocked off of the bridge. In Phase 2, he gets an attack you can parry, which sadly means he's the only enemy I've not managed to parry yet. He just does so much damage, and if I screw it up, I'm probably dead. I'm going to link to a video in the description of someone actually competent trying to parry him, because I don't think I'll manage it before I get this video out. Because you can kill Dancer early, this is the latest boss you can fight out of order, as to progress, you have to have killed all Lords of Cinder to force the key to the Archives to spawn. The Grand Archives, home to the first of only 2 bosses being reused throughout the entire game. As you step in, the other Crystal Sage, twin and student of the sorceries of Big Hat Logan, spawns. This area is pretty great if you're a fan of gangbangs, taking backshots and having strange old men throw white goop all over you. The intended route takes you past gargoyles, which is a nice reference to how the level designer can gargle my fucking nuts. Before making it to the most important shortcut of the level, you have to experience everyone's deepest desire. A foursome with a small Japanese man and a guy called fucking Albert. Sorry if there's any Alberts watching, because I don't want to associate with a name that goofy. The Archives isn't like gratuitous or anything, but it's not an interesting area by any means. Following on upwards, we climbed some stairs leading to the penultimate story boss and the final Lord of Cinder. Lothric and Lorien, the twin princes. Yuka Kitamura has earned a spot in my amnesiac brain for her work on the DS3 soundtrack, and the twin princes is no exception. To be honest, everyone did a great job. Even the boring parts, or anything I deem not interesting enough to talk about, are still better than a lot of other games. I'd take any section in Dark Souls 3 over Elden Ring, and I know that isn't an opinion people like to hear from me, but I digress. Lothric knows that by linking the flame, it only perpetuates the agony and the cycle of decay, cleansing and relapse. He wants to let it all fade into nothing. First phase has the player fighting Lorien, the elder brother, a formidable conqueror until he was rendered mute and lame by attempting to cure his brother. The fight flows really well, and it's one of the most enjoyable of the entire game, with the only caveat being that it takes time to understand how to deal with the teleporting. You can actually parry Lorien, not from his sword, but by parrying his hand instead. Phase 2 sees Lothric joining to resurrect his brother as they're linked from their attempts to cure Lothric. It also helps the player understand that it's a normal mechanic, and that they should target the younger brother instead of focusing effort on the older. Also, it's hard to notice, but the young prince actually calls on the power of the flame he forsook to save his brother's life, becoming embered just like the player and the other Lords of Cinder. Lothric adds magical attacks to the regular moveset of his brother, but it's otherwise the same fight. Very enjoyable and a high note for the game. I've not said this yet, but in the lore, after defeating a Lord of Cinder, you actually just cut their heads off and shove it into your back pocket for later. Although, that's probably just a visual thing for the player instead of carrying around literal piles of ash. But I like being obstinate. After beheading this twink, you're tasked with returning to the shrine and bringing the ashes of the Lords of Cinder to their thrones, in order to claim their power as your own. This little ceremony leads you to the Kiln of the First Flame, the area where Gwyn sacrificed himself to kindle the Age of the Gods, and where all manners of men attempt to claim the power of the flame for themselves, most being unworthy and turning to ash. Because this fight is such a great final story fight, I'm going to stick a pin in it and take a detour to cover one final base game boss that's really out of the way. Upon defeating Osiris and descending the stairs behind his room, the player comes face to face with a suit of armour seated in a contemplative or meditative stance, which, when interacted with, will reward the Path of the Dragon gesture. Backtracking to the Irithel dungeons just before where Carla's freed, using this gesture on the carpet will lead the player to the Archdragon Peak, an area that really hates players. It's unexplained whether the player's really transported there, is only there spiritually, or if it's all just a dream, but the fact it affects Hawkwood's storyline kinda tells us it has to happen to a certain extent. The first of 2 bosses here is a really boring gimmick with a horrible runback. The player's never intended to actually fight the Wyvern. The dev intention is to just run around fighting snake guys until you reach a platform, you can do a plunging attack on the Wyvern and kill it in 1 hit. It's not hard to fight it properly, it's just boring and inconvenient. The killing blow causes the player to teleport again to a room just behind the plunging platform. And after killing the enemy that summons endless Drake Knights or Havel Knights, you can use the Dragon Path gesture on the carpet to get the Calamity Ring, which has no effect other than doubling the damage the player takes. Considering how late in the game the player gets it, it feels like FromSoft was scared of putting it earlier, in case a new player doesn't read what it does and makes their game so much harder. But they didn't want to gate it behind the final boss, putting it in an out-of-the-way location most people miss on their first playthrough. Just feels like they didn't follow through hard enough with their intentions, but that's just my opinion, so I don't have to actually talk about Archdragon Peak. After the second bonfire of the second area, the player can summon Hawkwood to help fight the regular world enemies, which is nice because it shows he's giving up his cowardice and fighting for something he stands on, and it's really appreciated because the giant snake guys are real buttholes. Defeating all of them leads to an altar facing a fucking massive dragon, where the player can receive the Twinkling Dragon Torso Stone. Travelling to the shrine after this debacle and speaking to Andre gives the player a unique item, just like with Sirius's questline, telling the player, "Come to the mausoleum in Farron. Only one can take the path of ancient dragons." Standing over the corpses of his brothers in arms, giving up his battered shield and embracing the ways of the Abyss Watchers, Hawkwood duels the Ashen One for ownership of the Twinkling Dragon Stones and the power of the dragons. He was a deserter, a traitor to the ways, but the amount of damage his shield has shows he was no coward. He just knew that what he was fighting for was doomed. People may think he was a coward, and I definitely echoed that sentiment for a reason, but he proves that he has the strength and will to fight for what's necessary, even honourably dueling his only friend for the power to become a Lord of Cinder. He's Ashen just like the player. That means he tried to fix the world once before and was found lacking. I'm also shoehorning in the end of Sirius's quest here because I'll be honest, I lost the part in the script where I should have put this. I didn't even do this much work for my diploma. Claiming Lothric's ashes ends the Sirius questline, and her body, lifeless and content, is found at the same grave her grandfather was laid to rest in. I mean, I am aware I've just accidentally sat on her face. Maybe not the most respectful thing I could have done. Going back to Archdragon Peak, pulling the lever in front of the giant bell starts a boss fight renowned for being one of the hardest of the game. And not to brag, but somehow he's just got really easy to first try now. I think a couple actual proper content creators are agreeing with the sentiment, but the Nameless King fight is actually kinda easy now. First phase is lackluster, but second phase makes up for it, even if he's not the threat he once was. Dodging his attacks and getting your own in between is something that only works this well in a handful of other fights, namely Dancer and the final fight of the series, maybe a couple others too. The lore is very lacking, but a common fan theory is that he's the lost son of Gwyn, stricken from history after allying himself with the dragons that threatened the Age of Gods in times long forgotten. I mean, Dark Souls 1 doesn't actually explain why they killed the dragons. Maybe they were making a dragon IRS and Gwyn just didn't want to pay taxes. To translate that for my fellow Brits, imagine the dragons are the HMRC and Gwyn doesn't want to get a license for tax evasion, so he just kills them instead. That's probably the dumbest joke I've written into a video, and I'm kinda hoping I don't make one worse than that. With only one boss left, it's time to return to where our story first begins, the kiln of the first flame. Crossing the threshold, passing stones melted with the heat of countless cycles of kindling, sat at the bonfire is a lone figure. Approaching causes him to stand, remove the sword from the flame, and initiate combat. The Soul of Cinder, manifestation of all previous Lords of Cinder, Sentinels of the First Flame, and the power of fire. This fight is everything I could ask for and more, with one of the best soundtracks of all gaming. Want to fight a regular knight with a big sword? We got that. Want to spice it up by fighting a magic user? Sure thing. Want to see a massive hunk of metal do backflips? Right here. He cycles between different fighting styles, calling on the previous fire-linking lords to help kick your butt in as many ways as possible. And if you don't want to fight a certain style, just don't engage and he'll swap off soon enough. He hits hard and truly embodies a test to see if you're worthy of the power to link the fire, and his health bar takes a decent amount of time to deplete. It works here so much better than anywhere else because it thematically ties everything together. Once that health bar is down, he thrusts his sword into the ground in an explosion of fire, calling on the flame one final time, channeling the power of a god. The god. Gwyn reincarnate. Dark Souls 1 only showed us an empty husk of Gwyn as the fire waned, a god in name but not in stature. DS3 shows us the power of a god in all but name, the Gwyn phase being the strongest and most dangerous of all forms. I don't personally like Gwyn's OST from Dark Souls 1, it's just a lot that's going on at once, but my god if Yuka didn't nail it with this fight. The beginning, the transition, the somber tone of Gwyn's theme. Oh my god, it even has a watermark. The culmination of the fight and the story up to now leaves you alone with the bonfire and the choice of what to do. You can link the fire, reset the cycle, prolong the age of fire, and fix nothing. You can let the fire fade, ending life as you know it for a time, until a new cycle starts and things could be different. You could take the flame for yourself and rule as you wish, becoming a god among monsters, or you could claim it in the name of Londor and Hollows, the seemingly truest reflection of humanity. I've been sat here for like an hour at 5 in the morning trying to think of some way to summarize the base game, wondering if anyone would even care to listen to what I say. I'm not the main character in my videos, I'm just the one helping the games get their own message across. This game is so important to me, but it's equally important to many others in a way not many games have managed to capture, and that's kind of beautiful in its own way. To think that a game coming from Japan, from a franchise known to piss people off, would have such a profound effect on its players. And this all started from Kingsfield and a demo that was deemed poor quality and not worth publishing. It's turned into a monolith of gaming and storytelling. It's kind of inspiring. I just hope I've been able to do it justice so far.
Go on. Take it. Touch it. And then the ashes were too.
The first of 2 DLCs, this story takes place in a location as familiar as it is foreign. I reread my script to see how I covered the DLC entrance, and apparently I had a massive autistic rant about Reddit or something, so sorry about that. The DLC is accessed by talking to Gale, a man worshipping in the chapel adjacent to the Cathedral of the Deep. Loading in sees the player in a cave with a very talkative crow that I've never once bothered to listen to. I just know he tells you to go find a place to rot or something. Because the DS3 lore says that due to the fire waning, the lands are converging and crumbling together, it gives the designers a great excuse to take an area like the Painted World of Ariamis, which was famously a slapdash area where all the unused stuff was put, and rework it, giving it character and life that it didn't get otherwise. It could definitely be seen as cowardly and a bad decision to just run past all the enemies, but it's not gratifying or worthwhile to fight basically any of them. They do crazy high damage and they take a lot to kill. It also lets you cut down the pointless parts of the DLC to like half an hour tops. Yeah, that means I bought something to play as little of it as I can, but shut up. There's 2 bosses to this DLC, and only one of them actually means anything, so obviously I'll be talking about the other one first. The Champion Gravetender fight isn't terrible, but it's a far cry from the caliber we're used to from this game. It's a gank fight, a fight against a humanoid, a fight against a caster, and a bad attempt at capitalizing on Sif, as every Souls game seems to need now. There's 2 parts at the start of the DLC where you can be attacked by the Gravetender's wolf, and beating both of these will reduce the health it spawns in with. But it's honestly just easier to kill it from full health than to try and survive the ganks you fight it in. I like everything the DLC tries to do, but its execution just leaves a lot to be desired, and as much as I can still recommend the DLC to someone that likes base game, I think it should have had a little more time to cook. Then again, ultimately, it wouldn't be a Souls game if it had enough time to cook, would it? The Gravetender fight takes place under what looks like a coliseum, like the one you kill Artorias in, and you get an item that lets you do arena fights upon your victory, like how defeating Artorias opens the PvP arenas. And you know, Sif was the dog of Artorias, and Gravetender is tending a grave, like Siren does over Artorias' grave. I'm sick of saying the name Artorias. I feel like I've said Artorias so many times, it doesn't sound like a proper word anymore. Artorias. Moreover, I'm pretty sure it's implied that the thing above you in the fight is the arena for the Priscilla fight in Dark Souls 1, and yes, we're moving on from that minor mental breakdown. Halfway through the DLC, you get a fight with someone so charismatic, I still quote him to this day, although I just can't get his voice down to save my life. Wilhelm has a great story, and a fight that's over in like 3 parries. 4 if you get unlucky and let him heal. I've not done the miracle run yet, but I'm expecting it to be really annoying because he has Vow of Silence. Such a cool character, but they really squandered not only a great voice actor, but all the potential this character has. I'm going to divert before coming back to this point, because there's something important to the story. Defeating Wilhelm gives you a key that lets you progress, and incidentally also frees a nameless child. Given that Ariamis painted Ariamis, and Father Ariandel's blood feeds the Painted World of Ariandel, the community named her Aria. I mentioned her like an hour ago without explaining who she really is. She's got dragon features and she's able to paint a new world, but that's most of what we hear about her. She refers to Gale as uncle, but that's most likely honorific or a term of endearment. It's something a lot of non-native English-speaking countries do, and it kind of goes back to the whole point of the games being translated from Japanese. Anyway, back to Wilhelm. Until now, we've had 2 people we can talk to that have any real ties to Hollows and the Sable Church of Londor. Yol doesn't really tell us anything, considering I'm sure he's supposed to be excommunicated and that's why he's sent off to die. Yuria only glazes the Sable Church, pretending everything's fine and peachy, and then now with Wilhelm, we get basically nothing as well. There's a Bell of Awakening in the snow just past the room you free the child from, and he seems to know it was sabotaged by saying, "No bell tolls, and yet you've slipped into the painting." And, "You miserable mad hollow, you're nothing without a bell to guide your way." So it's likely he had a hand in stopping any other Ashen from getting involved, but all we really get to know is that, as a knight, he was in service to the Sable Church, before forsaking all of that to follow the person that gave him his sword. The sword, the power to enwreath it in black flame, and his using the Dark Hand tells us he's in league with the Dark Wraiths of Dark Souls 1, and at least the first 2 of those were gifts from...
Fret not, Father, we have no need of thy flail. 'Tis only the flame quivering at misguided ash. Please avert thine eyes. I will snuff out these ashes for good.
Sister Frieda isn't my favourite fight, but she's 100% my favourite boss. Okay, I was looking for a way to avoid saying cool because of all the snow in the DLC, and what the fuck is this? No British person has ever said fucking nang before. Anyway, the whole aesthetic of a nun beating the shit out of you with a huge fuck off scythe is something I stand for. She's a difficult boss and one of the hardest to parry, but the start of the fight just feels like an honourable duel against someone that has no compassion for humanity. Founding the Sable Church with her sisters, she's known to be ruthless, but she gave all of that up and freed Wilhelm from his service so that she could come here. It seems she truly cares for the inhabitants of the Painted World, people outcast and seen as rotten and forlorn, so I feel like she would have heard the stories of a tall, enigmatic, scythe-wielding protector with the power to turn invisible, and then she modelled herself after that in order to give them a protector and someone that accepts them. As a founder of the Sable Church, it can be inferred she's hollow too, but she has the look of a regular human being, giving credence to my theory. Beating the first phase sees Frieda dying, which enrages Father Ariandel and makes him freak out, and release the best scream I've seen in any piece of media. This is one of my all-time favourite cutscenes, and it serves to piss me off because everything about it is awesome, but it's been all but forgotten. Enraged, seeing his sworn protector having lost the fight, you get a real sense that nothing really matters to him anymore. There's no thoughts behind those eyes, just pure, unbridled rage. Just so happens that outburst provided Frieda with something to kindle herself with. There's way too many things I could say about this fight, or the characters, but I'll save the two people that made it this far that hassle. With Ariandel joining the fight, Frieda takes a much more passive and defensive role, still adding to the pressure, but more so dealing crowd control and area denial, as well as disappearing to heal the both of them in her role as protector. There's this unspoken dynamic between Frieda and Ariandel. She only says 3 sentences to him, yet you still get this sense of history and caring. Phase 2 is fun, but challenging, and landing the final blow on either gives untold relief, as well as a neat little titanite slab as a reward. I can't think of a better fake out. And while the game is 8 years old and basically everyone knows about it by now, it's just such a great moment. It's things like this that make the game so iconic. One last push, the power of fire wasn't enough for her to win, so her only choice is to fall back to what she's denounced, her humanity. Black Flame requires immense feelings, sorrow and pain. As a hollow, she inflicted torment, leached the humanity out of people, and here she is now utilising it to beat the shit out of the person that just took everything she cared about away from her. When the smoke fades, all that remains is the burning of the fire and one last journey. And soon the flames did fade and only dark remained. Thus began the Age of Men, the Age of Dark. However, Lord Gwyn trembled at the dark, clinging to his Age of Fire, and in dire fear of humans and the Dark Lord that would one day be born amongst them. Lord Gwyn resisted the course of nature. Flame creates heat, but when the fire dies and the heat subsides, the cold and the dark contract all they affect. Unfortunately, I kinda don't like most of this DLC, and I'm ashamed to say it's really going to reflect in my writing. The random world enemies are more of a threat than any of the bosses. However, if FromSoft made them weak hollows, then it would have just been more of the same. Damned if you do, damned if you don't, really. This DLC was made to answer all the questions, and it really didn't answer anything. Just made like 37 new ones. Personally, I feel like the story being told was really tertiary to cool set pieces and mostly great bosses. For example, the lap questline is literally, go here, speak to guy, move forward 15 steps, reload, talk to guy again, follow his advice, or choose not to and reload the area 3 times, speak to him again, you get a free item. You don't have to summon him for the next boss fight, and the next step of the quest is just to go find him in a very not hidden section right next to a bonfire. You've got this entire new world to explore. The Earthen Peak brings a multitude of questions about DS2 and its canonicity. Why is it here? The Ringed City brings questions like, is the decay an inherent part of humanity? Why does nothing about the story of the furtive pygmy seem to matter? Or, more importantly, why is there no big boober mummy to hold my hand and call me her little pogchamp? That's been a lot of negativity, and it's not like I hate everything, so it's time for some positivity to round it out. Midir has ruined Skyrim for me. I can't just stand there face-tanking a dragon while recklessly swinging a sword at it. The fight against Midir is the best dragon fight I've ever had the honour of experiencing. That such a brutally hard fight is so fair, and the dragon actually behaves like a real dragon. It's something I don't even think Elden Ring managed to replicate. The enjoyment of fighting something like Dancer or Nameless King is exactly how this fight feels, with an epic orchestral track to boot. It puts him in my top 5 fights for sure. He's got great mobility, and he's threatening as all hell, but it doesn't feel like he's being unfair at all. He's just a good little puppy that can fly sometimes. The culmination of the story, my script, and even the video itself. Slave Knight Gale. Taking a moment to listen to his soundtrack, it has traces of the Usurpation of Fire ending theme for the Dark Soul. It's a melancholic explosion of despair, but also of reverence towards Gale, or his sacrifice for the greater good. Thematically, Gale is the same as the player, an ashen one that's fought until the end of time itself, doing what must be done, holding out until the final instance, practically outside of time itself. Gale has to die, and he knows this. Corrupted by the blood of the Dark Soul, he starts to lose himself, fighting not because he wants to, but because the power of humanity compels him to survive, to become stronger despite the fact there's nothing left. Whether due to the corruption or the inner conflict between Gale and the Dark Soul, suddenly, he's no more. You're left fighting a husk of one of, if not the greatest men to ever exist, fueled entirely by the raw power of the very thing that makes us what we are. The Slave Knight Gale fight is the best possible way to end not just the game, but the series itself.